Welcome to Philosophy 15. I'm Scott Aikin.
And I'm Robert Talisse.
We are going to continue our discussion of polarization in politics here. Last time we left off with the question whether or not political polarization, or belief polarization as we're calling it, is a manifestation of the confirmation bias, that you get, you might say, more information supporting the view from folks that you agree with. So you might say it's still an epistemic phenomenon, one that's explained in terms of that, but it's explained in terms of certain kinds of epistemic deficiencies. Why is that wrong, Rob?
Right. So this purely informational account looks like it founders on a couple of experimental results. One is that you can get the extremity shift even in the absence of the presentation of anything that sounds like a new consideration.
They don't need to even say anything? They just need to nod their head yes? Or?
No. Well, we'll get to that in a second. But you can get the shift to the more extreme content even if everyone just says ditto. Right? Even if people just repeat the same evidence.
Even if they say the same thing.
Now, there might be an informational interpretation of that that Sunstein actually explores, where you say, well, everyone in the room who agrees that P is giving the same reason R for P,
and they're aware of no defeaters for it.
Right? But one might interpret the 20 people saying reason R, reason R, reason R as showing that that reason is accessible or evident to people from lots of different kinds of epistemic perspectives, which is a kind of
meta-evidence about that.
Meta-evidence for R. Yeah. Good. Okay. Here's what I think is the more challenging result for the purely informational account. So, deliberating groups which contain an extremist advocate for the group belief. So, somebody who is already holding an extreme version of the, let's say, anti-capital punishment view. Those groups do not shift more quickly or more radically to an extreme view than do groups similarly constituted of all moderates.
So they all move at the same pace?
No. It's just what one would expect on the purely informational account with the confirmation bias thought is, but let me add one other feature of this. As we all know from department meetings, people with the most extreme version of the department's view, the extremists in the group, speak louder, at greater length, and more frequently than moderates. So.
Not going to respond to that.
So.
Till I have tenure.
So. Groups with an extremist member who therefore speaks more loudly, more frequently, and at greater length in support of his particular instantiation of the group belief. That group will not shift more quickly or more extremely than a similar group that has all moderates. Now, if the extremity shifts were the product of a kind of confirmation bias and an informational sort of coding, you would expect the opposite. You would expect a group that's got a distinctively extreme advocate speaking loudly at greater length and more frequently would also be a group where members are going to hear newer, more unfamiliar, more novel-sounding reasons. So you should expect the group with the extremist member to also be a group that shifts more radically and more quickly after deliberation, but they don't. Moreover, related second point, the belief polarization phenomenon does accelerate if you enter the discussion with an extreme view. So it accumulates. In other words, it's a downhill sort of acceleration, as it were. You start off more extreme. Like-minded discussion moves you quicker and more radically than it does to the people who started off with more moderate views. So it looks as if those two, I think closely related findings, suggest that the informational account can't really be surely information exchange is part of what goes on in these like-minded discussions. Surely information exchange plays some role in explaining the phenomena. It can't be the explanation, though. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
Okay, so what is the explanation? The leading opposing account of the phenomenon is what's sometimes called the social comparisons account. And this does look like it does better. Again, it's not so much that the social comparisons account denies that information exchange is part of the engine driving the phenomenon. It's just saying that the informational content isn't the thing that's driving it. It's that what's going on in information exchange is actually some other kind of phenomenon. And okay, so the social comparisons account of the belief polarization phenomenon has it that members of like-minded groups, in discussion of the thing of which that they are like, over which they are like-minded, or with respect to which they're like-minded, want to appear to one another as authentic inhabitors of the group identity. They want to seem like they're not posers or half-hearted or sometimey in their group identities. And so each person seeks to be seen by the other members of the group as an authentic group member.
And to see themselves.
And to see themselves as an authentic group member, which means each member of the group is motivated to present themselves as distinctively and admirably a group member.
Yes.
So what that means is each member is recalibrating his commitment so that it's a little bit more fervent or a little bit more notable than what the others around him are asserting.
That's right.
Without coming to occupy the extreme.
I'm not the extremist, but I'm, you might say, a red-blooded, full-blooded member of this
Exactly.
group, which means that you have to, it has to be demonstrative. So it is an informational model, but it's not the information we were thinking about.
This is right. So yeah,
there is information exchange, but it's about group membership.
And the comparisons. You're recalibrating
and
your commitment.
Group membership.
And good. So it's easy to see on this account how you get the belief polarization phenomenon in the group, because it's an arms race. Everyone is doing this at the same time. They're recalibrating up.
And one extra thing to this is that they don't even need to see each other, right? There were other findings that it looked like people's beliefs got bumps in terms of their confidence, not just in terms of being able to have other people see them, but finding out that other people agreed with them.
Well, good. So this is the reason why the standard presentation of the social comparisons explanation can't be right either.
Yeah.
Because you can get, note, the social comparisons model, as we've just described, it does require what we've been calling recalibration. I have to get information of what your temperature is on your opposition to capital punishment in order to calibrate up so that I'm distinctively but still authentically a group member. So I have to keep reading the room, as it were. Now, as it turns out, you can get the extremity shift of belief polarization in the absence of any of the kind of information that would enable one to recalibrate. So it looks as if...
So it's just, sometimes it's just then a matter of not just being seen by others, it's seeing yourself then.
That's good. Right. So it's... What looks like it's actually driving the phenomenon is what we might call mere corroboration. You can get extremity shifts by showing someone a chart. What the chart has to do is first make salient to that individual his or her group membership, or make salient to that individual the fact that he or she identifies in some relevant for her or him sense with some population, right? So a chart showing something about recycling habits among liberals can create extremity shifts in liberals' beliefs about the importance of recycling, right? Or in one experiment, which shows that we're far more willing to excuse bad behavior politically when it's conducted by people who we regard as on our own side, like stealing campaign signs. When liberals find out about other liberals stealing Republican campaign signs, they think it's just, that's how politics gets done. They tend to regard it as a real infraction when it's done on the other side. But anyway, just a chart showing, hey, you're a liberal, okay? Liberals tend to think this thing, some version of which you think. That suffices to get the subject to shift to the more extreme content. So think about political optics. Think about your neighbors who up until a couple of weeks ago, maybe even depending on where you live, to this day, have on their front lawn 100 campaign signs for the same person. And the signs are identical. It's not an uncommon thing to see around election time.
It's true.
Is one lawn with a couple 100 signs that are the same sign for the same person. What's with that? Turns out campaigns recommend that kind of thing because it's a whole lot of corroboration, right? Corroboration here is totally non-epistemic in the way that we're using the term,
thing. Yeah.
right? Corroboration is just the numbers game. How many yays? Right, what's the density and number of yays for my view? But ironically, of course, and this is the part at which, the polarization phenomenon does suggest that we are epistemically far less in control than we would like to be. Ironically, it's the corroboration of people who are like you, believing the thing that you believe, that gets you to believe something new, something else, right?
Yeah.
Which is a strange result. But it looks as if mere corroboration is the making salient your group identity, showing you, giving you some reason to think that something you believe on the basis of that identity in the first personal sense, that others who share that identity also believe that thing that you believe. That's what is sufficient to induce the polarization effect.
And so these causal features of polarization, particularly belief polarization, look progressively less epistemic as the evidence keeps coming in, and keeps looking less epistemic and more epidemiological. It looks more like a kind of set of causal features where it's like we seem to not just catch beliefs from each other, but it looks like there's a kind of amplification of those beliefs that we have on each other, and it looks like once you've got a sort of a weird feedback loop that happens, that seems to have a causal effect of ramping them up. The question with all these sort of feedback things, you've been in a rock band and things like that, how do you stop the feedback? Right? Once the feedback gets going, how can you clamp your hand, clamping your hand, turning off the microphone? How exactly is that supposed to, what are the ways that we can manage this now? We see it as a causal phenomenon instead of an epistemic one. What are the ways that we can then manage it? Because again, the issue is not just that it's bad and not just that it seems to be with us a lot, but we see that there have bad consequences. How can we handle that?
Now it's not shutting off.
I can't handle that.
Let me just say one last thing, and then and we'll end it. You're right. The phenomenon does look more affective than informational, than epistemic in a strict sense, right? Although it does have epistemic impacts, because what the effect does is it induces in us beliefs that are further out of step with our evidence.
Right.
Okay?
There are epistemic consequences.
Yeah, good,
right.
good.
Right.
So we believe something more radical than what the evidence we have access to, first personally, permits. And because it's not merely causal but affective, it looks like it's the remedy is going to be far more dicey.
Managing the sentiments, then.
Right, which is not merely a taking a vaccination. It's not. It doesn't translate well.
It's not purely causal, then.
Into the into the epidemic sense,
right,
of what the phenomenon is. It's Philosophy 15, folks. See you next time.